Level 3. Okay, so a level 3 practitioner is able to develop a production-worthy NLP system in a given area using open source platforms or libraries. Okay. So the difference between the level 3 and the level 2 is that the level 3 practitioner has enough understanding to be able to build their NLP system using an open source platform or library. Okay. Now, what happens typically is that for closed source platforms, the company that is providing these platforms, right, is providing certain features, for a fee, making, money from it, directly, right? And so because of this, they take a lot of pain to make sure that the system is very easy to use. As a matter of fact, you could use Watson to build a chatbot, without knowing much about NLP or artificial intelligence generally, right? You just, learn a few things and you can basically build a system, right? Why? Because they take a lot of pain to make sure that the system is very easy to use for people that are not experts or for people that don't know a lot about how these dialogue systems work, right? Open source libraries, on the other hand, don't tend to take that much pain to make things as easy, right? They often expect some kind of, knowledge about how the system works, right? They expect you to be at some kind of level in terms of your knowledge about the system, right? And so because of that, they are not as easy to use as the closed source platforms and libraries. Okay. And so in order to be able to use them, then you need to really know more about that area of NLP. Okay. And a natural question that might arise at this point is, well, if the closed source platform is easy to use, I know very little and I can sort of develop a solution and use it, why should I bother with open source platforms or libraries? Okay. And the answer is simple, really. Open source platforms give you a bit more flexibility. Okay. They give you a bit more flexibility. You can change almost anything about how the system works, so long as you understand what you're doing. Okay. So this will come down to, your use case, what you are trying to do and what you need. You may be given a task, to build a system, a chatbot, and you may find that the way that the closed source platform is working is not how you would want your system to work. And you may find that they do not provide a way to modify the system to work in the way that you want. Okay, because here's the thing, right? The system that the closed platform system that has been developed is being developed to be used by many people, right? So it's built to be, kind of generic, or is built to work in the way that will accommodate the needs of most people, that will accommodate the needs of the majority of people. So when you have a use case that might be slightly different from the general use case, or you want your system to behave in a certain way that may be slightly different, you may find that you are unable to use the closed source platform to do that. Maybe they don't provide a feature, or they've sort of fixed the way that the system is supposed to work, right? So it just may not work for you. So then the only other option that you have is to use an open source library, right? Where you have more flexibility. Okay. when you talk about chatbots, for instance, one of the primary things that chatbots need to be able to do is to what is something we call intent classification or dialogue act classification. Basically, giving an utterance, or if you like, a statement, the dialogue system needs to be able to determine what is your intent, or what are you trying to do, and that's something we call classification, right? It's a classification task. Okay. Later, like when we start actually doing the course, I'll explain what all these terms mean, like classification and how it's done and all of those things. But for now, think about it as, you say something and the system needs to determine what you are trying to do, right? Are you trying to perform task A or B or C? Are you looking for information A or B or C? All right. Now, a closed source, platform does this classification, right? So usually they will ask you, to put some examples of the kinds of things your users will say, and then they will perform the classification for you, or the intent determination for you, right? And they use some algorithms, right? And the algorithms that they will use in doing the classification, are probably good and strong, because these companies have really good people to work on these kinds of problems, right? But it's very conceivable that you may have a use case where the algorithms that they are using are not necessarily the best for your use case, right? But you cannot just swap out, one algorithm for another, right? You cannot just say, well, they are using this algorithm, but because of my particular case that I'm using, this algorithm will do the classification better for me, and therefore let me replace the classification algorithm they are using with this other classification algorithm. You can't do that, right? Because you don't have access to the source code. You don't have the ability to change what they have, right? And so you don't have flexibility, right? Whereas if you had an open source platform, then you could go and, swap out parts that you don't really like with what you want, and make all these kinds of changes so that the system works better for you and the particular problem that you are trying to solve, right? So this, may be, the reason why you may want to use, an open source platform and library. And like I said earlier, it really comes down to your use case and your problem. If you look at what the requirements are for the system that you're supposed to build, is the closed source platform enough and able to do all of these things to the accuracy that you want it to, right? If not, then you can consider an open source library where you can, change certain things about how the system works and make sure, it works in a way that suits you. In order to use the open source platform or libraries, you need to know more, right? You need to know more than the level 2 practitioner, right? But you are also more capable because you can, tweak things or change things and make things, exactly the way that you want them to be, right? So that's the level 3 practitioner. Okay. The level 4 practitioner is someone who is able to read and implement NLP research papers in a given area, right? So at level 4, you can take a paper that has been published relating to dialogue systems, right? So maybe dialogue act classification, what I was talking about, like intent classification, right? Because people are increasingly trying to improve the performance, right? We call the state of the art, right? People are trying to improve it and make sure that it works better and better and better, right? So these things, people are always working on these things, right? So if you are a level 4 practitioner, what it means is that you should be able to take a paper that has been published in that area, right? And be able to write the code for that paper, right? Sometimes, people write research papers and they give the code. Sometimes they don't, right? But you should be able to understand enough what they are saying, right? Understand the research paper and basically be able to implement that, right? And again, right, that definitely gives you sort of a leg up over a level 3 or level 2 practitioner, right? Because what happens if you are using a closed source platform is that when any changes or updates are made, you need to wait for the platform owner to basically upgrade their systems, right? Until they do that, you can't take advantage of any new techniques or new ideas or concepts that have been developed, right? Whereas if you know how to read and sort of code these things yourself, then you may be able to, maybe quickly update the system and use it or take advantage of the things that are being published. Okay, so that's what I'll call a level 4 practitioner. A level 5 practitioner is someone that is able to produce new NLP knowledge, right? Which is research, right? In a given area. So you know the area so well enough that you can produce knowledge in that area, right? You can introduce a new technique, a new idea, a new concept that experts in the field will agree is a contribution to that area, right? And typically at this point, you either need to be like in a PhD program or have a PhD typically, right? In order to be able to produce knowledge that, your peers consider to be true contributions to the field.